Welcome to Distribution Talk with Jason Bader, the show where we dive into the stories, struggles, and solutions from business owners and thought leaders in the wholesale distribution market. Hey, podcast listeners, Jason here. In this episode, I had the pleasure of catching up with Jim Sobeck, CEO of New South Supply. New South is a building materials distributor based in Greenville, South Carolina. I met Jim several years ago at a trade association meeting, and I could tell that he was not a typical distribution owner. Jim is a long-range thinker. He seeks out those ideas that put him way ahead of other people in the market. I enjoyed my conversation with him, and I hope you will too. All right, Jim, welcome to Distribution Talk. Thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Hey, as you know, on this show, I love to go back into the history, and let's get a little idea of what brought you to distribution. What was that path that you followed?
Well, I grew up similar to you in that I grew up in a construction business in Pennsylvania. My father had a commercial roofing business and was one of the biggest commercial roofing contractors in the state. I was kicked off allowance at age 12 and had to start working in the warehouse, sweeping. Thought it was pretty cool when I was allowed to load trucks and do things like that. Then when I got my driver's license, I was able to make deliveries in a non-CDL truck. Then I just progressed up the ladder. And when I was getting out of college, I decided I wanted to do my own thing, make my own way in the world. I was hired by Lloyd Fry Roofing Company out of Chicago, which was acquired by Owens Corning about 2 years after I started with Fry. That got me with Owens Corning. They promoted me at 23 to a regional marketing manager in Dallas, Texas. And I had the sales and marketing responsibility over 6 branches of Owens Corning, about $125 million of P&L responsibility at age 23. You either grow or die when you're thrown into the deep end of the pool at that age.
Sure.
And then I was recruited away by a customer, Builder Marts of America, here in Greenville, South Carolina, where I still live. I moved here in 1979. BMA was doing about 82 million at that time and grew it to 630 million when I left to do my own thing. And so BMA was a for-profit buying group for lumber dealers. It allowed independents to have sort of a main office for purchasing power, marketing, advertising, management assistance. And at 29, then I got into the computer software business for lumber yards and then via acquisition for contractors as well. Did that for 15 years, grew that company very significantly from 8 million to about 30 million. And during the height of the internet bubble, got a ridiculous offer to sell it in 1999, closed in 2000, took some time off and found out, A, there's no off switch on a Tiger. B, I missed being in the game. I'm a competitive person and, I just wanted to get back in it. So I did an acquisition of New South Construction Supply, which was based in West Columbia, South Carolina. At that time, the company had 5 locations, and we now have 9. Sales are up about 600%, despite a small recession after 9/11 and then the Great Recession. 2008 through 2010 wasn't fun for anybody in this business.
No, it was not.
And so we've grown to 9 locations. We got into rebar fabrication. We now have 8 rebar fabrication shops. Rebar has become our biggest product line. It's about 60% of our sales. And our other 2 niches are masonry and waterproofing. So that's about a 2-minute recap of my career.
Yeah, there you go. 40 years and 2 minutes right there. Definitely, you've been kind of all over the building materials business. Before we dive into a couple of other topics, what do you like about building materials? There's a lot of different vertical markets in distribution. You can do all kinds of different stuff. And I've now seen several different vertical markets, but what do you love about this building materials side?
What I love about it the most, we all learned in school, there are only 3 needs: food, clothing, and shelter. Everything else is a want. And so it's not a fad business. It's not a hula hoop. It's not a pet rock. people will always need shelter, so it's never going to go out of style. And so I love that. I love the people in it. They're not, fancy people. They're down to earth. Most of them are salt of the earth kind of people. Their word is their bond. Having grown up in the construction business, I'm very comfortable in that world, and having done every side of it, from sweeping warehouses to acquisitions and divestitures and being a CEO. I can speak to a guy, in our rebar shop, and I can speak to a CEO of a company who went to Harvard Business School and everything in between. So the other thing I love the gross margins of software. Kind of hard to beat 99.4%.
Sure.
But what I didn't like is we had a customer call one day, and he couldn't write himself a bonus check for 1.2 million because our software wouldn't allow a payables check over $999,999. And I got with our VP of development, and he said, Jim, you don't realize it's not easy to add another field. It'll be probably 6 months. It touches so many places in the software. And two lessons from that. One, I don't like businesses where you can't fix things inside of 6 months. And two, when somebody in this industry was paying himself a bonus check for 1.2 million, I said, I'm on the wrong side of the equation here.
Yeah, definitely. No, and it gives you an interesting perspective. One of the things you and I talked about, and this actually comes from your book, we'll plug it really quick here, The Real Business 101, Lessons from the Trenches. That came out in 2013? Is that about right?
I think it was 13, yes.
One of the things that you had mentioned in there is to computerize everything. Again, obviously that comes from your software background. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I had a mentor early in my career when mini computers first came out, and they were a 10 meg hard drive. Mini computer was the size of a side-by-side refrigerator. And he really fell in love with it and all the things it could do. And he said to me, computerize everything you can. Computers don't join unions. They don't get pregnant. They don't lay out drunk from work. They don't ask for raises. That wasn't lost on me. I picked up on that pretty quickly. So, we've been able to grow the company 600% while decreasing our accounting staff 40%. And it's because we're so computerized.
So, some of the major things that you have moved over to computer, you were talking a little bit earlier about, moving into mobile technology, going with some inventory management optimization, some pricing optimization, all these different outside sources. Could you share a little bit about that?
Well, sure. The foundation of it all is when I bought New South, they had a generic flat file system, and it was pathetic. We couldn't integrate any third-party products. So we issued an RFQ, and we searched the industry. Even though I had a background in it, I wanted to make sure we did a thorough search. And I'd been on the lumber and millwork side, so I looked for a general wholesale distribution package. And we went with Epicor's Profit 21 for several reasons, but one of the main reasons was it was written for Windows from the ground up. It wasn't like most of the other software packages that were available, a GUI bolt-on. And for people who don't know what that means, GUI being a graphical user interface. To me, I equate a GUI bolt-on, a Windows GUI bolt-on, like putting new cabinet doors on your old cabinets. You just change the facade, but everything behind it is the same. And Profit 21 was a couple years old. It was native GUI. You could integrate all sorts of third-party products to it. Mm-hmm. We were able to get the rights to integrate anything we wanted. And the other thing I liked, one of the references we checked had about 2,500 users. I didn't want to put in software that we would outgrow as we grew. And right now we're at about 105 users. So we're not going to outgrow the software in my lifetime. So we started with that platform. And from there, we've added on other products. And one of the more transformative products was licensing the pricing algorithms from Strategic Pricing Associates. SPA takes our customer data, and using a series of algorithms, not only does every customer get a different price as opposed to the old 1 to 6 pricing levels. When I was in software, we thought we were pretty cool. We went from 4 pricing levels to 6. So like level
Yeah.
1 would be retail, it'd be 40%,
Sure.
and maybe level 6 would be 25% for your biggest volume customers. But the problem with that, it'd be 25% on everything. And so right
Right.
now,
Right.
the software recognizes that if someone buys, for example, a concrete contractor buys a lot of rebar, they get a very good price on rebar. But recently, I saw one of our customers that's a concrete contractor for some reason bought 2-inch Dow styrofoam. Now, they don't buy that often, so they didn't know what that should cost. And we got a 72 margin on the styrofoam. And so our gross margin has gone in about 5 or 6 years from 24.5 to 31.7 because we sell smarter. And one of the things that I constantly preach to our salespeople is getting out of markup ruts where you can only get 20% on this, you can only get 25 on that. Well, some of our obscure items, we can get 75 or 100% margin on them because people don't know what they cost. So
Right.
that was transformative. Then we added cost to serve software so that we could look at what is our net profit on each and every sale that we make. And then we look at it in aggregate quarterly by customer. So, we'll see that we have a customer that we are doing big volume with, but actually losing money on due
Yeah.
to either low margins or long delivery distances, or in one case with one customer, 2,300 deliveries in 1 year. And the worst being 9 deliveries to the same job site in one day because they didn't plan well. And so we were able to see that we had a lot of big volume customers that we were making little or no money on. And we were able to meet with those customers and talk about, what can we do to get the profit up? And, our salespeople were terrified of that. Oh,
Yeah.
well, he'll quit us. He can buy from anybody else. And the first guy we met with said, "You're not going to fire me as a customer, are you?" And he said, "I love your service. I love your
Yeah.
people." And he said, "What can we do to fix this problem?" I didn't have one customer that I met with throw me out of their office. Then we also added a mobile app, and my son was our VP of finance at that time. He left earlier this year after 15 years as he married a young lady in New York City who does stand-up comedy in New York. She couldn't pursue her career here. And he said, "Nobody's going to use this mobile app." And I said, "Well, one thing I've learned from being in software, it's like body surfing. Stick with me here. When you body surf, if you don't time the wave properly, if the wave crashes over your head and you try to swim and catch up to it, you'll never catch it. You've got to look for that wave, look for that wave, look for that wave, and then start paddling." So I said, nobody else yet has a mobile app, a real-time mobile app. One competitor had one that was a fake mobile app. It went to an inside sales group in an Excel spreadsheet, and they had to key it in. So I said, "I don't care if anyone uses this mobile app. We don't charge them for it." And my son said, "What do you mean you don't care if they use it?" I said, "I don't want to be late to the party. If somebody else comes out with it first and we have to wait 18 months to catch up, once people learn to use a mobile app, they don't want to learn to use 3 or 4. They can't keep it straight in their mind." And having been in software, I know the benefits of first mover advantage. And we've had some of our customers that use the mobile app now tell me that certain competitors are coming in saying, "Well, we have one now." And this one of our top customers, actually our one of the guys in our top 5, said, I told him, "Listen, we've been using New South for 4 years now. Everybody here knows how to use it. I don't want to confuse them with another one. Thank you very much. Goodbye." So I was trying to achieve that goal, and we did. And last year, I think we had about 22,000 orders come in via the mobile app. I don't know how many inside salespeople that saved us to enter 22,000 orders. So that's another thing we did. And the last really big thing is porting all of our reporting from Excel to a data visualization product called Periscope so that we can see profitable sales are green, marginal sales are yellow, unprofitable sales are red on our daily sales register. Then we look at our quarterly branch reviews, where we made our deliveries in that branch. We have a heat map. And if I see that a certain area starts to glow red, that we're making a lot of deliveries there, that tells us where we need to put another branch. So it's just so much easier to look at reports when they're graphical, pie charts, bar charts, different colors, heat maps. And so we've done all those things. And, there was a person that was here a few years ago from our biggest competitor, a publicly traded company. And he said, "Do you have any idea how far ahead you are of them?" And I said, "Well, one of the things about being David versus Goliath is, we have to swap out 115 PCs or train 115 people. But when you have 17,000 people, the cost to change, the cost of being ahead of the curve is prohibitive. And for us, we can pivot on a dime. And we do all the time. I'm kind of hyperactive and I know it. And I know that most people hate change, but if we're up to me, I'd change everything every day.
Speaking of that, there's got to be several people that it's difficult, when you are introducing these things, because you are extremely forward thinking on this stuff. And I would imagine that there are several people in the organization that might be a little uncomfortable with that. How do you coach them and how do you help them make that transition?
Well, when I was with Owens Corning, I went to a change management class and I was shocked to find out that most people hate change. There was a study that showed of the top 5 fears of human beings, number 1 is public speaking. I've obviously conquered that.
No, well, that's why I gotta have a job, Jim. I mean,
Yeah.
because there's so many people who don't want to do it.
Number 2 is fear of change. Death is number 3. So most people would rather die than do public speaking or change. And that was a shock to me. And the speaker said the only people in the world that like change are wet babies. And we didn't bring everybody along for the ride. There were some people that left. When I bought New South, they didn't use email. They would fax between the 5 branches. And one of the first things I did was install an email server. And I had an outside sales rep up in Raleigh who said, "I ain't using email. I ain't typing. I don't like to type. I didn't take typing in high school. I took wood shop, so I quit." So some people self-selected out. Some people we had to help them out because they wouldn't adopt the technology. But most people came along. And some of the people who were hesitant, now you can't pry it out of their hands.
Yeah, I think, it does. It takes a while for some people to get over the hump. If they're willing to follow you and they're willing to do that, absolutely. That's something then all of a sudden they recognize, hey, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, until you bring the next thing in and it's going to have to go through that whole cycle one more time. And talking about the buying of companies, and I imagine there's a lot of personalities when you come into these organizations, and you've purchased a few companies over the years. And
About 8.
About 8. All right. Well, let's talk about a few of those things. When you're going and taking a look at acquiring a company, what are you really looking for? And what would be those red flags that you say, you know what, I'm walking away from this one?
Well, there's a great Harvard Business Review story that talks about a study that was done. And if I remember correctly, it's in the neighborhood of 72% of all acquisitions fail. When you think about that, that's a pretty high failure rate when generally you're talking about millions of dollars spent on an acquisition. So, what the story postulates is that most acquisitions that fail due to a poor cultural fit. And when I was doing acquisitions in software, I did 6. I walked away from probably 10. I've walked away from several in my current company because, for example, when I was trying to do an acquisition in New Jersey, and in our office, people wore jeans and golf shirts and T-shirts and that kind of thing. And I went up to this company in New Jersey, and even the programmers wore coats and ties, and they were real straight-laced and real formal and real expensive offices. And I just believe my father taught me this: you never want your business, when you're in our kind of business, to look more than about a 5 on a 10 scale. If it looks like you're too successful, then you'll hear from your customers, no wonder your prices are so high. Right. And this place was mahogany desks and a giant conference room with a wet bar. And I knew that when I slapped my corporate culture on them, we were going to lose most everybody. And when you're buying a software company, you're buying a customer list, but you're buying intellectual capital. And you don't want the programmers and the support people to leave. So the most important thing by far is the cultural fit. And so that's the thing that I always look for. Do we mesh? And when I met the owners of New South, The very first time that we met, we talked for about 3 hours. We ended up having beers, and I just felt their culture would mesh really well with how I like to do business. And so to me, that is the single most important thing you look for.
Gotcha. So, one of the things I also read in your book, you talk a lot about financials and audited financials, the importance of that type of thing when you're looking at a company. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Well, one thing I've found doing acquisitions, most people won't pay for an audit, and they have unaudited financials. Sometimes they're reviewed by a CPA. You'll see on the financial statement, this was compiled and reviewed, but not audited. That's my first red flag because all they do is basically see if the rows of beans add up. They don't go in and test revenue recognition. They don't make sure that things are being amortized instead of expensed. And so almost always I find that the books are not accurate. Now, with New South, I had a very pleasant surprise. I sent in our auditing team, and the auditor called me up and said, "Yep, you're right. The numbers are not correct." And I said, "Wow, how bad is it?" He said, "No, they're better because they were expensing things that they should have been amortizing. They were not on cash accounting, but they were on cash accounting when it behooved them so that they could lower their taxes. And the company was actually more profitable when adjusted to GAAP." So that's the thing I find with a lot of small businesses. When you adjust their numbers to GAAP, sometimes they're more profitable because they're trying to, lower their profit so that they can pay less taxes. I learned early on in this business, a lumber dealer said to me once, I use the count a shed, skip a shed method when I count my inventory in my lumber yard. And I said, well, why do you do that? Well, so I have less inventory, so it lowers my profit and I pay less tax. So, I always say, unless
Yeah.
there's two types of businesses, and you
Right.
probably know this. There's lifestyle businesses and there's
Yeah.
investable businesses. And
Yeah.
if you're running it for a lifestyle and you've got you and mama and your brother-in-law and 5 kids on the payroll, and all you care about is your lifestyle, then milk the hell out of it. Expense everything through the business.
Right.
I was with a customer one day on his boat. We stopped at a marina and he got ice for the cooler and he asked for a receipt. And I said, why'd you ask for a receipt? He said, well, I'm going to expense it. And so if you're running it to screw Uncle Sam and to fluff up your lifestyle, that's your business.
Yeah.
Well, and Uncle Sam's if you get audited.
If you get caught, right. If you have to have that little discussion. Yeah.
But to me,
Yeah.
I was schooled by one of my early mentors, run it like you're going to sell it. So
Yeah.
we're audited. We have a 6-person board of directors, 5 outside directors, and me. I'm in a forum group of 10 CEOs from companies around the state of South Carolina, and not one of them have a board of directors. They just they don't want to get advice from somebody else. They don't want to listen
Yeah.
to them. They're afraid to open the kimono and show people their numbers.
Yep.
And what I do is I surround myself with people a lot smarter than me and get them very inexpensively, and then I listen to them. But most people won't do that. So we have an audit committee and we have a compensation committee. So we have minutes of every board meeting going back to the first board meeting in November of 2001. I know people that go to sell their company and will spend an entire weekend falsifying a minutes book going
Yep.
back 25 years and doing fake corporate minutes quarterly for 24 years. That's not a fun way to spend your weekend.
No, not at all. And I think you kind of hit on something there that I've been shocked at. Well, not necessarily shocked, but I've seen over the years, many of our cohorts, in the trade association that you and I were a part of, that many of them do not have any type of outside advisory service. They just, for one reason or another. And I've met a few of them that have actually put together boards of directors, and they tend to be the ones that have staying power. They're the ones
Right.
that are there long term. But boy, when you're just relying on your own best ideas, man, I think there's some problems there.
Why not surround yourself with 5 other people that are smarter than you and shut up and listen?
Yeah. I think there's some fear there. I mean, maybe that some of those expenses, the twin engine delivery truck at the end of the dock, those types of expenses might be called out. You might, some of your cohorts might just say, hey, I don't know if I like this.
Well, and they might call it out, but one thing you can do is do adjusted earnings where you take the excess compensation out and you show your board, here's what I'm reporting, but here's what the company's actually making when I subtract the excess compensation. And it's not like your board's going to turn you into the IRS. I hope not.
Yeah. Or you've picked the wrong guys,
Right.
definitely. But no, I think that there is a definite amount of wisdom. And let me ask you about your board. Are they primarily in the same trade, building material folks, or do you have them from all walks of life?
Two with a building products background. My son, who used to be our VP of Finance,
Yep.
remains on the board and he represents the rest of our family. We're 100% family owned through a family trust. And so he's the representative for his mother and his siblings. And
Hmm.
he knows the business inside and out after 15 years here.
Sure.
One of the most profitable lumberyard owners that I know of in the US, lumber and building products, $52 million in sales, 13% net income. I want to listen to him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
another guy that went to Princeton undergrad, Harvard Business School, and didn't go into investment banking or commercial banking or consulting. And he ended up in distribution. And then I think at about 28, bought a security lock business that did the locks on hotels and office buildings and all that, and grew it from 8 million to 120 million. And so I listened to what he has to say. Another guy that Wharton MBA in finance was a Citibank LBO banker doing leveraged buyouts, $500 million and up loans. And then the last one, an Englishman from London who now lives in Mississippi. He was a turnaround guy, and he's the equivalent of a CPA in England. They call him chartered accountant, and
Hmm.
had a turnaround business and turned around a business he ended up buying. So this is a diverse group of people that
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
very, very smart people with a lot of experience in a lot of areas.
One thought that's coming to my mind right now is, how do you attract these people? How do you form them? How do you invite them to become part of your advisory group or your think tank?
Well, the guy with the Harvard MBA, I was reading his columns in a trade journal, and he had his phone number in them. And the shy guy that I am, I picked up the phone and said, I'd like you to be on my board. And he said, tell me a little bit about your business. And he's been on the board of my last two companies. And I just picked up the phone and called him.
Gotcha. So pretty easy on that one. I think that's one of the preventatives is there's a lot of people that don't really know how to form this board and really how to ask that question. Will you be on my board?
Right.
Do I pay you? Do I not pay you? How often do we meet? All of these questions. And actually, my former mentor, a guy named Rick Johnson out of Florida, he was very pro board. I mean, that was his thing. And he actually spent a lot of time not only on boards, but he would help companies, especially distributors, form these boards of advisory. But I don't think there's other people that do a whole lot, a whole lot of that.
Yeah. And also, I'm on other boards as well in diverse businesses, but you can learn good ideas anywhere. I was
Hmm.
on the board of a food service business that they replenished vending machines and also provided on site cafeterias in manufacturing plants and schools. And they had an initiative one quarter that was called Get the Extra Nickel, bump up your price on everything a nickel. Well, when you
Yeah.
bump up your price a nickel on 30,000 items over a quarter, most people don't notice a nickel, and the impact of the bottom line is amazing. I would have never thought of that idea on my own.
Yeah, it's kind of fun when you run across that. I've been fortunate enough to be on a couple of network groups, online network groups, and they're from very diverse organizations. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Just some of the ideas that you pick up there with these boards. Compensation wise, is it a huge expense, little expense?
It's really it's very affordable. I mean, I'll tell you that I pay them $1,000 a meeting. So we have 4 meetings a year. So each director gets $4,000 a year, and then they get $500 for each committee meeting. So when the audit committee meets with our outside auditors, that's generally telephonic, and they get $500 for that phone call. So to me, that is chump change.
For that kind of advice, absolutely. Is there a certain size of company, Jim, that you would start to advise and say, maybe you should start looking at a board of directors? You need to hit a certain scale before you bring in that advisory group?
I think first off, you've got to decide, are you a lifestyle business or are you an investable business? I'd
Right.
say for most lifestyle businesses, it's a waste of money because if all you're going to do is bleed it, I don't think you need much advice on how to bleed it, maybe some more creative ideas on how to skim or something. But
Sure, sure.
I
Yeah.
think if you're trying to create an investable business that you can sell down the road, then people are impressed when you have an outside board. And I would say revenue wise, probably not worth it less than $5 million a year. But
Okay. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. You keep mentioning the word investable business. I think obviously that comes back to the you could sell this anytime. That
yep.
this is a sellable business. And I think that's always been your philosophy around this company and any company that you've owned is the business is sellable.
For example, when I was in the software business, I tried to buy a competitor out west. I won't name names or even city, but when I approached them and they finally agreed to meet with me, they gave me financials, and they had not been running it as an investable business. The company was making less than 1% net on $8 million in sales. And I told them, they said, well, what do you value it at? And I said, well, we got to throw a multiple of earnings out the window because you basically don't have any. And then, book value, you got a bunch of computers and leased office space. That was next to nothing. And I told them, the other metric that I looked at for software companies was zero point 0.5 your recurring revenue.
Right. Right.
And, they had like 1.2 million in recurring revenue. And the guy said, I'll burn this to the ground before I'll sell it for 600K. But 3 years later, he approached me and he'd gotten serious about it, cleaned up the business, started playing for keeps instead of for sport. And, I ended up losing out in acquiring him to a public competitor because he made his business more attractive. And after he sold to the competitor of mine, he called me and thanked me for schooling him on how to put some lipstick on the pig.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the big things. I literally had a call a couple weeks ago from someone just saying that she was ready to sell this company. She's been in it forever and ever. The problem was that she was the company.
Yeah.
I had to be very polite about it. And I said, you don't have the greatest chance of getting a good sale on this business. You've worked hard for 30 years, but I just don't know how I can help you, make this thing a sellable business, especially if you want out quick.
Well, I think it's the author Jim Collins that talks about two business models: the genius with 1,000 helpers model versus a solid management team.
Right.
And when you're a genius with 1,000 helpers, you have nothing to sell because when you walk out the door, the business is worthless.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm planning on starting next year a 5-year exit by selling the company to the employees via an ESOP.
Yeah.
And ESOPs don't work unless you have a strong management team. And I've got a very strong management team. And I think that, I can start easing out and be totally out by 70. And they will not only miss a beat, but hopefully they'll do better than I did running it because they're younger and there's some people with a ton of energy and ideas. And so I feel very, very good about the crew that I'm going to be handing the keys to the car to.
Excellent. No, that's a great plan. And I think, those that really plan their transitions are the ones that don't get caught in this situation. In the industry, in this staff related industry that you and I, are in or have been in, I see it all the time, where people all of a sudden decide, what am I going to do with this? They're in the last, 5 yards of their life, it's the end of it right there.
Well, 5 years ago at age 60, I sat down with our accountants and all my financial advisors, tax attorney, et cetera, and we came up with a 10-year plan for me to be totally out by 70. And so, we're halfway through the plan. We had to do some things, for example, converting to a C Corp because we were an LLC and you can't do an ESOP with an LLC. The partner of the accounting firm I use said to me, this is so refreshing. I've never had anybody come in and say, I want to start on a 10-year plan to get out. They come in and say, I want to start on a 3-month plan to get out.
Right.
And there's
Right.
certain changes that you have to make to avoid tax issues that they have to be old and cold and moldy. If you do it 2 weeks before the exit, the IRS can come back on you. So, there's the old saying, I'm sure you've heard it, no one plans to fail, but most people fail to plan.
Right. Well, and fortunately, I had this similar experience, with my father. He planned, and we went to family business seminars, and we looked at this thing. Oh, yeah, a good 10 years before he was finally out of the business. So the transition worked really well for us, but I've seen a lot of other companies struggle with this.
Besides our board of directors, we have a family meeting every 6 months, run like a board of directors meeting. We have an agenda, we have minutes, we have motions, we have actions. We run the family council like a corporation as well. And it takes a lot of the emotion out of it. When people just come in and wing it, people get upset about things. But when you send out the agenda a month ahead of time, people have time to review the financials and look at the updates on our strategic plan and things like that. You're not surprising anybody with anything, but again, I don't know many people that do those kinds of things.
No, and I would agree with you that it definitely is a rarity. I'd love to see more of them, especially as I've had a few guests that talk about having, 13 members of their family in that organization. I'm thinking, all right, guys, we really better, organize this, or it could become chaos pretty quickly here. So.
Well, the problem with family business most of the time, from what I've seen, is too much family and not enough business.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. Well, Jim, looking at the time, any last parting words of wisdom for us?
I'll reiterate about planning. Don't wait till the last minute to do things. Make sure you have a plan for what you want to do for your retirement, for your exit. I can't stress enough the benefit of an outside board of directors and to run it like a public company, because you never know someday when somebody's going to come in and offer you stupid money for the business. And you don't want them to back out because you don't have audited financials, you don't have board minutes, and they move on to somebody else. You would really kick yourself. So, those are the things I really want to stress.
Well, hey, again, thank you so much for coming on, and it's always a pleasure to see you.
My pleasure. Good to see you too.
Thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, consider hitting that subscribe button. Links to sponsors, products, and services mentioned during this episode can be found in the show description area on your podcast application or at www.distributiontalk.com. Distribution Talk is edited and mixed by Andrea Klunder and Edwin Ruiz at the Creative Imposter Studios. This episode was brought to you by my company, The Distribution Team. We are a consulting services firm dedicated to helping wholesale distribution clients remove barriers to profitability, generate wealth, and achieve personal goals. To learn more about how we can help your company succeed, check us out at www.thedistributionteam.com.